Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Indianaut Podcast, where we interview some of India's next best analytical and creative minds who are not only revolutionizing their own field, but at the same time transforming India's entrepreneurial ecosystem one step at a time. Our guest for the day is a man who is a legal subject matter expert on all things technology. He is the founder of Ikigai Law, an award-winning law firm that represented the cryptocurrency exchanges in the Supreme Court and was instrumental in getting the crypto ban put in place by the RBI revoked. He is also the BusinessWorld Achiever of the year 2017, a former TedX speaker, and now officially dubbed an Indianaut. We have with us Anirudh Rastogi. Let us jump right into the conversation. I hope you're all settled in.
Absolutely.
Right.
Pleased to be here.
So that's great. So let us start things off, right? I want to ask you about the legal status of cryptocurrency in India, right? So in March 2020, the Supreme Court lifted the ban of the sorts from cryptocurrency. And even that ban was quite unique in the first place, right? Which was put in place by RBI. So why don't you walk us through the judgment once and what can we make of the current legal situation around cryptocurrency?
Sure. Happy to do that. So, in fact, if you like, I can take you a little back in time as well, even before the judgment, before the matter kind of came into being in the court. But before that, let me just quickly answer what is the current status. So the status is exactly what it was before this ban of sorts, which is that there is no law essentially which talks about the legality of a regulation of cryptocurrency. So what that means is that you can very well legally trade in cryptocurrencies. You can hold them. You can do what you want. There are of course various other concerns that remain, which are not necessarily all stemming necessarily from the law, but there are concerns. So I'll come to that. But just talking quickly about the judgment itself. What the court actually has held is that it has basically said that the action of the RBI in banning cryptocurrency, or rather banning, to be precise, banning access to banking for cryptocurrency businesses was a disproportionate measure. And what I mean by that is that your law always needs to be proportionate to the risk that it is, or the concerns that it is trying to address, the problem that it is trying to address. Now, here, the RBI was unable to establish the risk, the concern, the harm caused by cryptocurrencies, and it wasn't able to establish that the action taken by it was proportionate to that risk. All right. So now, what were the risks really? If you look at it broadly, there was the risk of loss of monetary control. There was the risk of tax evasion and avoidance by people who choose to transact in cryptocurrencies. There was a risk of money laundering and terrorist financing, etc., etc. And our argument in the court, which also held water, was that really there are, these kind of concerns remain true with all kinds of financial instruments, right, including with cash or with digital money, or with other kinds of financial assets. And there are various ways and through various regulations that the RBI and other regulators control or address these concerns with respect to those financial instruments. So the concerns remain. They're not new. Of course, they may be amplified in certain cases when it comes to cryptocurrencies, or they may be slightly different, or they may be new. But the means to address these concerns have also existed, what was warranted here was a clear analysis of what that risk is, and a clear analysis of how we could have adopted alternative, less intrusive measures, stopping short of a ban, to address these concerns. That did not happen, and so that's really what the court has held. What it has not held, however, is that it has not said that the RBI does not have the power to regulate cryptocurrencies, which was also a key argument. So very well, the RBI or the government could come back and try and legislate around this judgment. It could now choose to collect and present evidence of harm, and it could come up with something which is slightly more proportionate to that harm. Whether it will be a ban or not, that is to be seen. But clearly, there are other ways which are available to the regulator, and that's really where we are. So currently, there's no law. That situation might change, but as of today, transactions are happening. People are actively investing in cryptocurrencies. Businesses is kind of coming back, and that's where we are.
So from a consumer's point of view, although there has been a sharp uptake of the sorts and the volume on cryptocurrency exchanges in India, right? But from a consumer's aspect, there still does remain this regulatory vacuum of the sorts, right? Because even though there's a draft legislative bill which talks about banning cryptocurrencies altogether, and RBI can also come out with further notifications or further circulars, right? So from a consumer's aspect, like, what do we make of this vacuum of the sorts? Like, is this a safe space to invest in? I mean, keeping all the investing risk aside, is this a space where one can invest easily right now, or one should be cautious?
No, I mean, see, it's obviously not a great, very comforting place to be in, not for business, not for the consumer, because there is obviously uncertainty as to the future of the space in India, and you don't know which way the RBI is going to go. Now, the last time when this ban was imposed, what happened was that a lot of consumers could not exchange or withdraw money from the exchanges, and obviously what a ban also means is that suddenly your liquidity comes under pressure. So that risk obviously remains so long the government is not willing to give us any clarity. But having said that, it may never be a zero or one kind of a situation. I mean, all or nothing kind of a situation, just because ultimately there is a market for, and that's the beautiful thing about cryptocurrencies, right? That there is a global market, and all said and done, there is the decentralization or disintermediation involved with cryptocurrencies means that you are never able to kind of contain or completely restrict the flow of. I mean, it's global by its very nature. It is that tomorrow, unless the government were to clamp down completely, even if I don't have access to a market in India, I could possibly offload my assets in the US or wherever else. So I think to that extent, it is both comforting and not.
I think that was the basic structure of when Bitcoin came in place, right? That the anonymity and the lack of a central government or a lack of a global government having a hold on its power of the sorts. That is what attracted people to it in the first place, internationally at least. But in India, I think the majority of folks, while investing in Bitcoin, the only thing that comes to their mind is the returns, right? Is the crazy 1000% return.
No, I mean, honestly, I would say that that's true everywhere else. And in fact, while the speculation around cryptocurrencies in terms of the pricing, right? Speculation for investment purposes is obviously part of the concern, but it is part of the reason as well for which the technology behind all of this has suddenly the adoption of the technology got escalated or accelerated also because of the secondary speculative market around it, right? Because when there's a clear monetary incentive to innovate, innovation does take place. So I think yes. But to your point, just my thoughts on it. I think globally that's the case. I mean, people are ultimately investing in cryptocurrencies for the large part because of people. The typical kind of average user looks at it as a speculative investment, and in fact, there are enough more stories about grandmoms in Korea, investing in Bitcoin, and that's a clear sign of when things are becoming too hot, right? Now, obviously, since then prices have corrected globally and significantly so. But yes, I mean, so as I said, it's both a cause of concern and also the reason why we are seeing so much innovation in this space.
Definitely. I think when we talk about the speculative aspect, another thing that arises is that people have slowly started looking at Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a sort of a safe haven. Like how people used to think about gold once upon a time, people have started slowly adapting to Bitcoin as that measure, right? That if there's global volatility, if there's like an uncertainty about the future economy, people might start investing in Bitcoin of the sorts instead of relying on central banks and the, for example, it's the USD or the INR, etc. People might start adapting more towards Bitcoin or the various other cryptocurrencies. In fact, when you talk about the Korean grandmas, I think the first thing that came to my mind very weirdly was the Winklevoss twins, right?
Sure.
They've also become Bitcoin millionaires of the sorts and
Sure.
whatnot. So I think yeah, success stories arising out of Bitcoin speculation.
But I'm curious, why do you compare the Winklevoss brothers with the Korean grandmom?
I think that was the first thing that came to my mind randomly because the next question I wanted to ask you was that
I don't think the twins would be very happy with that.
I don't think they would be.
Comparison.
But I think the next question I want to ask you circles around the Winklevoss's twins' sad history.
Sure.
And that would be even Facebook tried to adapt and bring forward its own kind of a global currency, right? The Project Libra, although Project Libra has faced a lot of issues and whatnot because a lot of the earlier backers have backed out of the sorts. But even Facebook did try to, what do we say, monetize on these efforts in a positive way of the sorts.
Of course. And I think I mean, honestly, if I were to think from Facebook's perspective, the grand vision is definitely compelling from their standpoint. I mean, I would I would have concerns. I've voiced my concerns in the past, but at the same time, I mean, I think the vision itself is compelling, which is that, well, I already have however many millions and millions of users on platforms where these users engage with each other on a several times through the day. Sometimes we are literally on WhatsApp every single minute that we are working or not. And you could so easily plug in functionalities on top of that layer. And the moment you're able to add a payments layer to it, which, by the way, I mean, as we all know, WhatsApp
payments.
Is anyway at it, but the seamlessness with which a blockchain-based payments mechanism can integrate with something like this and enable payments globally, that seamlessness is definitely going to be unmatched, right? See, the important thing about cryptocurrencies that we should understand is that it is a currency, if I were to call it a currency. I mean, and that's kind of debatable and controversial. But if I were to a payments mechanism that is native to the internet, that is it is not an external. It's not external to the ecosystem that is being now kind of that we have to adopt for the digital ecosystem. This is something which is native, and because of which there is less friction. There are no intermediaries that are involved to first kind of digitally represent a fiat currency and then kind of tokenize it and use it on the ecosystem. This is something which belongs there, right? And so the seamlessness is unmatched. And the other thing is, because there are no intermediaries, you can do payments globally. You could literally do micro payments, which is not possible in fiat. I mean, ultimately, there is I can't break
a denomination right now.
I can't break a unit into its fractions, right? I mean, it is the unit recognized by the government. Right. But when it comes to cryptocurrencies, I could do any of that. I could essentially, there's a very interesting example I'll give you of some one kind of blockchain application, which is about micro task management. Now, if I want to essentially do a podcast, and there are 100 different tasks, small tasks that make up this entire kind of project, right? Mm-hmm. And I could literally, instead of giving that one entire piece, or maybe breaking down the podcasting to two and delegating it to two people, I could break it down into 100 pieces. 100 components. There's recording, editing, and then there's editing of a particular first 10 minutes and the editing of the next 10 minutes. There's the, whatever else, right? I could break it into hundreds of tasks and auction it to users across service providers across the world, to literally 100 users, service providers, who are all working all at the same time, globally, non-stop, and I could pay them seamlessly and in terms of literally, and kind of make these micro payments to these for these micro tasks, which was not otherwise possible in the fiat ecosystem at all. Right? One, it is limited by geography. It is limited by the unit of denomination. It is limited by the terms and conditions imposed by and the cost imposed by the various intermediaries. So all of that goes away. And that's why I think, I think we kind of took a long detour, but basically that's why I think that the aspiration for a global platform to essentially integrate payments, for a global communications platform to integrate payments on is something which will definitely create tremendous efficiencies and convenience. It will come with its own set of concerns, which have been very well voiced, concerns about privacy, concerns about competition law concerns, etc., and obviously loss of control by regulators and whatnot. And here's a company which also is being scrutinized by regulators globally for various reasons. So there are all of those concerns, but certainly, I do think from a consumer perspective, it would be the efficiency and the seamlessness would be beautiful as well.
I think another use case which just came to my mind while you were mentioning Facebook and the payments platform, I think Facebook also recently announced Facebook Shops, which will basically allow any Facebook page to act as a storefront, and then, take that reliance of people going to external websites to go and buy products, that also being taken away. And if Facebook is also successful in integrating a payments platform right onto its own ecosystem of the sort, so then we have payments, we have a shops platform and everything. So the way Facebook is slowly adapting things onto its platform, the way it is slowly expanding its current territory of the sorts, I think while it is really amazing for the customer, it does come with its own concerns of the sorts, specifically from a competition aspect. But I think that's something we can discuss in the future. Sure. Maybe I think 10 years from now, when Facebook's a mega corporation and practically owns everything in our country. So yeah. So I want to focus on you now. All right. And you specifically. Tell us your Indianaut origin story. How did you build Ikigai, to be more specific?
Oh, well, it started about 7 odd years back, my kind of entrepreneurial journey. I used to be working in Singapore before that, and I was with a law firm, with a multinational American law firm, looking at doing a lot of work pan-Asia for them. And I was at that point kind of done with the law. I was, increasingly, I for a long time harbored this, kind of inclination towards to starting something of my own, and it could have been a tech venture. It could have been I was more likely to have been that. So I was looking at a number of ideas at that point in time. In fact, I did work on something in Singapore for a little bit, which never took off. But the challenge was that that idea that we had, me and my kind of friend who was working with me on it, was illegal to start with. And so the first battle that we had to fight was to make it, was to work with the regulator to kind of get a sanction to do something like this, a small tweak in the law. And obviously that didn't happen, and which is when I started looking at other avenues. One being, coming back to India, going to Goa for 6 months. Like I think many people, I think, kind of romanticize about, some of these ideas. And I thought that those 6 months will give me clarity as to what I have to do. Somehow those 6 months, I never, this idea of starting a law firm kind of came to me a little earlier. I never went to Goa really. But the idea had something to do with my experience of trying to launch this startup in Singapore as well, right. Which was that I figured, and I think one is that uh, you don't go to the regulator uh, asking for permission before you even starting your business. It just somehow doesn't happen. It's not in their interest. It's not in their it's too small at that point in time to even kind of engage with you. And I think that was experience number one. But I also, during that phase, I also experienced a true need for the entrepreneurial ecosystem to be able to engage with the law, with the regulator, with policymakers, to kind of kickstart or give life to some of these ideas, which are currently, and a lot of ideas in the digital space today are operating within that ambiguous regulatory regime, right? Just because laws never contemplated this kind of rapid tectonic shift in technology and the adoption of technology, etc. So that was what I think that experience was partly responsible for giving birth to this idea of a law firm that was different in the way it engaged with entrepreneurs, that tried to solve a real problem, which was not just which was problems that were really existential to these businesses, right? And I think that reflects in many things that we do. So whether it was this whole kind of long entrenched battle for cryptocurrency businesses in the country, it was an existential threat, right? And
Right.
Or what we have done on the policy side for drones, where we've had some tangible contribution to make to the way the policy narrative has evolved in the drones industry, or what we do with, say, for the content business, for the gaming business, telemedicine, even e-commerce and whatnot. I think so. We've largely been active on that front, really, right? I mean, kind of trying to help businesses navigate difficult regulatory circumstances, essentially.
That's amazing. So, I think we've spoken in great detail about yours and your law firm's contribution to cryptocurrency. How about we shed some light on some other topics of the sorts? Because, like you just mentioned, Ikigai is working on a lot of interesting things. So, why don't you share some of the recent announcements that have come out of your law firm's work and whatnot? For example, in the aviation and drone industry.
Sure. I mean, drones definitely, I mean, is a murky area from a regulatory standpoint. We've been very active. So just like in cryptocurrencies, there was a de facto ban on drone operations for a very long time.
Okay.
And now, while the ban has been somewhat, I mean, there's a policy in place already. It's still quite problematic to conduct operations in drones. So again, we were essentially working with the industry, with think tanks, with the industry association, with the regulator, in trying to solve for some of these issues. Likewise, we've been now something very kind of recent because of the COVID lockdown situation. We've all been longing for some cold beer by the time we end our day, and it's difficult to your bars are all shut down. So we've been working very extensively on kind of the e-commerce, enabling e-commerce and home delivery for alcohol. Again, so what is now there as well? I mean, our work is now. It's interesting that it's not a new age industry. So it's a conventional industry that we're working with, but in the digital transformation of that industry, right? So again,
I think everyone's going to be really thankful for the digital transformation in this industry.
Surely.
I personally would be
I would say I'm
really
personally
grateful.
incentivized as well.
Yeah.
And, so I mean that's another very interesting area of work that we are engaged in right now. There is a fair bit of work on around telemedicine that we're doing right now. Again, becomes very important in the kind of situation that we are in currently. A lot of policy movement has happened in that space, and we're working with various telemed providers in kind of helping them comply with the law and deploy solutions at scale. One of the very interesting telemedicine solutions that we worked on, and that this was actually a couple of years back, which was that telemedicine solution for running ICUs, right? And this is, of course, as technologically as complex as it gets, and even from a legal standpoint, I think fairly complex, because so in India, there's a tremendous shortage of intensivists, people who are qualified to run intensive care units, right? And you'll be surprised to know that obviously all major hospitals have ICUs, but they're not necessarily manned by qualified people. And so the idea this company was working on was to essentially create, they manufactured this equipment, and they used to operate this equipment to essentially let qualified intensivists, say sitting in a Delhi or a Bombay or a Kolkata, remotely work with the doctor on the ground in an ICU. But why it was a lawyer's nightmare as well is that understanding that there is a very high chance of a fatality when the patient is in an ICU,
right.
And anything that could go wrong, whether by the doctor or the intensivist sitting in remotely, or on the platform itself, if say actually something as simple as a power outage or your internet connectivity or whatever else. And so there were really a very heightened risk of whether medical negligence or liability or even issues around use of real-time personal data that you're collecting, vitals that you're collecting of the patient and stuff like that. So so that was a very, very fascinating project that we worked on the telemed side. Again, the companies that have done very well in this lockdown period have been a lot of our content clients, and we're seeing a lot of content in vernacular right now.
All right.
We are seeing a lot of gaming companies, and again, a heavily regulated area, and we're working with them. A lot of fintech and payments companies, particularly digital lending, is something that we are doing a fair bit of. Blockchain, of course, activity is picked up after the judgment, but the government keeps doing its bit to, destabilize. Every other day there's a new announcement. So I mean, it's been a very, very busy kind of lockdown for us, which is both good and bad. I mean, in terms of you're also handling a lot of crisis situations for clients, which is while I'm thankful that we are able to be of that assistance to clients, but not everybody is in a very, very great shape right now. So that's really been the kind of work that we've been doing. A lot of investor disputes came up during this time.
Definitely.
Rounds of investments. Yeah.
I believe a lot of while in investor disputes, but at the same time, I believe a lot of employee-employer disputes would have also arisen due to unique situations such as offers being rescinded or sudden unemployment spikes and whatnot. I believe that
definitely, and they are becoming more and more complex in these times and more murky in these times.
So, I believe, I'm not an expert, but I believe the two terms which come up are force majeure, and the other would be, I think there's another similar term, right, which is act of God, I think.
Sure. So force majeure is something which these days clients don't even need to go to their lawyers. Everybody understands, I think, right. And everybody has seen enough webinars around what force majeure is. But very interestingly, I just came across, so we were reviewing a contract we'd done many months ago, and we were revisiting that contract in light of all that's going on. And we noticed that contract, the force majeure clause, a typical force majeure clause has examples of force majeure conditions. Like if this happens, if an earthquake happens, it will be a force majeure. If there's a tornado, it might be a force majeure condition. And typically now everybody is beginning to insert epidemic and pandemic in that definition as well. But this contract, which we negotiated several months ago, much before anybody had kind of heard of COVID-19, this contract already had pandemic in it. And I was quite relieved to see this, that, and I was clearly, this was not something inserted by me. It had come from the counterparty who had generated the draft. But interestingly, what's interesting is the other kinds of force majeure events that were also provided there. And one of it was uprisings and revolutions and a nuclear disaster. And just to give you context, the counterparty was Russian. So, it's interesting how a lot of what's happening all around us obviously informs.
Russia is pretty much prepared for anything at this stage.
Of course, yes, they've seen it all.
They've seen it all.
Right. So that was my interesting
I think you've had a
Uh,
pretty busy lockdown period of the sorts because various organizations, various early stage startups have faced very unique situations of the sorts when it comes to cash crunches or legal disputes and whatnot. I think you've helped a lot of early stage companies and mid-size companies adopt to these newer times easily. I believe I'm right over here.
Well, I would hope so. I mean, definitely we've been involved in some very, very critical, mission critical, life or death kind of situations for a lot of our business clients. And as I was saying, it's sad that many of our clients we've worked for very long have to find themselves in these situations. But I'm also grateful we are able to help.
Right, right. So while I was researching about Ikigai, I think one thing quite interesting which I came across was that Ikigai doubles as both a mentor and a legal advice of the sorts to startups, right? Given your personal interest in the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem, so I want to pick your brain on something that captured the Indian media's attention back in April, besides COVID-19, that is, and that is the new Indian investment rules targeted towards China. While tensions with China are at an all-time high right now, do you think that the new policy which has come into the picture is a justified response, or is it restrictive and problematic for early stage startups which seek Chinese funding regularly?
Yeah, I think you already somewhat answered the question. So I see. I think it is increasingly becoming important to have some kind of some checks in place, and I will talk about it a little. But there is definitely a concern, and a concern that I personally share with you, is that if you look at the pre-COVID scenario, the entire last couple of years, I mean, year and a couple of years, in fact, the amount of Chinese money that has kept the Indian startup ecosystem afloat is not negligible, and is you know and therefore, if we make it very hard for Chinese money to flow into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, we definitely have to prepare for its repercussions. If you talk to the government today, the government says that, well, yes, of course, but why can't we have the Indian investment, the investor pool, rise up to the occasion at this juncture? And why can't we incentivize Indian investors, in fact, to put in money into the venture capital ecosystem? Well, that's a noble thought. But all said and done, if you look at it, the bulk, the really heavy money that comes in, and the heavy expertise that comes in along with that money, typically has come from outside of our shores. And that is not going to change overnight. And even if it were to change, I don't think there's any reason to cut off this other source of funding and expertise, and strategic kind of benefits that might come out of it. Now, so I think a slightly more nuanced and a more balanced policy would have been warranted. Having said that, there definitely are concerns. The concerns, however, need not be targeted at one country. They need to be. I mean, if your concern is that, well, Indian startup assets are going to be available on the block at significantly depressed prices, and will be taken over by foreign investors, then that concern is not just why is it limited just to the Chinese investor? Having said that, this entire narrative has become slightly more complex with the events that have just happened in the recent past, with the aggression on the borders with China. And there's definitely I think you will see that the conversation that becomes a little more complex now. So just to give you an example, we know that a couple of Chinese companies in India, so I'm not talking about Indian investees, but just Chinese companies who operate out of and have their own people from China in India, are today having to are finding it very hard because there's an increased kind of scrutiny on things. You shouldn't be completely surprised if some plainclothed person from the IB walks up to your office and starts asking you questions. So those are definitely kind of those are the kind of things that are happening today. And for that reason, I think this is an even more complicated area to comment on now.
A very delicate issue of the sorts. I think there was something I read recently which stuck with me. So I think the United States has their own legislative body, which is known as CFIUS, right? Which looks at all overseas investments which are taking place and whether they act as a strategic deterrent or a strategic problem of the sorts for national security issues, right? So should India have a body of such magnitude of its own, which is overlooking each and every deal, or is that once again too huge a regulatory response as compared to the problem?
Well, I'm not fully familiar with the CFIUS framework, but this is what I'll have to say that in fact, something that we spoke about when we started our podcast, that any legislative action or governmental action should be proportionate to the risk and concern that you have to address, right? So I think a proportionate measure is what is warranted here. For large deals, large amounts of money flowing in from China into a particular company, into a sensitive sector, maybe warrants that kind of a review for sure. But if you're going to essentially ask me to go seek an approval for a $50,000 check from a Chinese company in a sector which is, say, vernacular content, content maybe still there might be just some kind of concern, but something which is
I understand any industry which does not pose a national security threat.
Right, and then so I think that's why I said you need a slightly more nuanced, a slightly more balanced policy around this, which is proportionate.
So, given how we've dubbed you an Indianaut of the sorts, what advice do you have for other aspiring Indianauts and other aspiring lawyers who wish to now become entrepreneurs?
Sure, I think there are a lot of people who readily give advice to other entrepreneurs. Of course, I can share tips, but it's the second part of your question which is slightly more exciting to me, just because you don't typically find lawyers giving advice to other lawyers who want to be entrepreneurial. Yes. And I think there really is a tremendous opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity for lawyers that is presenting itself. Least of all because of the kind of advent of technology in the law itself, whether opportunities around Uberization of legal services or use of technological products for kind of automating a lot of legal processes and whatnot, and databases and et cetera. What I would and also I would say that there is an opportunity for lawyers to be entrepreneurial also in essentially rethinking the way they provide legal services, right? Even if not with the use of technology, but just the conventional practice of the law itself. I think there is tremendous scope to kind of revisit, rethink, reimagine a lot of things that we do. Right? One instance, for example, or for how we thought that we are going to target a very, very relatively niche market that nobody else is looking at, but is a tremendous kind of gap. There's a tremendous gap in the market, and cater to that. So I think that is a very significant opportunity, and I think what makes it slightly easier is that most lawyers are not really. For some reason, there is a lot of the business thinking that is so readily available all around us somehow has not seeped into the legal industry at all. So if you were to even make kind of half-hearted efforts at being slightly imaginative in the practice of law, I think you're already leaps and bounds ahead of many others in the industry, and I think everybody should try and benefit from that. Certainly. I mean, I think a couple of things that apply to the legal industry, but apply to any entrepreneur, is deep focus, right? I mean, the kinds of, I don't believe in like a generalist approach to things, particularly in the legal industry. Most lawyers are generalists. It stopped making sense, I think, now. The need of the hour is super specialists who understand and solve specific problems for specific clients.
I think I want to cut you off right here. I think one thing that really, when you use the word specialist versus generalist, right? I think because India adapted a lot of its existing frameworks and systems from British times, right? Our legal system and whatnot. I think we also adapted this approach of having a generalist being much more superior to a specialist, right? I mean, UK is the kind of a country where the most prestigious educational degree is a PPE, right? It's not a specialization. You study 3 different subjects over 3 years, and I think it's that outlook which existed in the from the British time period and everything, which still stays with us, that we value more generalists than we value specialists of the sorts.
Well, I mean, if you were to take the education system as an example, I think there's even the American model is quite, puts a fair bit of emphasis on like you can literally, you don't, unlike in India, you don't go in to become an engineer and definitely become an engineer at the end of a 4-year course. You can choose your minors, your majors, you can change them. I think there's a slight difference which I like to draw. When I talk of specialization, I don't mean that it comes at the expense of breadth in your understanding or your ability to, think and work with across different, verticals or fields. That's not what I'm saying. So even in fact, as a technology focused law firm, we do have we have a lot of depth, but we also have a lot of breadth. And but the important thing to and the distinction I make here is, don't just work horizontally. Also have these deep interests or capabilities in certain specific areas.
Right.
But breadth is important, I think.
Definitely. That makes sense if you look at it from that aspect. So you talked about technological shifts in the legal system, right? And I think one thing which has garnered a lot of buzz in recent times is the use of technology, specifically AI and ML, when it comes to judiciary, the judicial aspect of things, right? That there have been a lot of people who've been vocal about now adapting methods of AI and ML and using them for judicial decision making, just to speed up processes and whatnot. But there have also been critics who raise pretty valid concerns that we are using pre-existing biases and then applying them to to future decision making. So what are your views on this entire debate that is going on?
I think it's inevitable that we'll have we will increasingly use technology, advanced technology, in the way we provide access to justice. And in fact, technology will be a key enabler for that. But we are still a long way off, to be honest. I mean, I've been, given the nature of our work, we also keep a close watch on global developments in the space. And there's a lot of work that is happening, but it's still we are still addressing the low-hanging fruit. So for example, there are software products that help draft contracts, right? The first draft of contracts bases a certain set of dynamic questions posed to the client. We're still at a stage where we only can automate very, very simple contracts at this juncture. Something that you would probably go to an average lawyer for a very low stake kind of matter, typically the NDAs and the like. But yeah, I mean, I think improvements are being made. Likewise, when it comes to a lot of machine learning based research of case laws, or even software that can actually produce a first draft of an opinion or a research note on a certain question of law, we are seeing those kind of products being rolled out. Still relatively early days. But yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that that's going to be the way things are going to be done in the future, and I think that's the and it will be. I mean, I look forward to that day, to be honest.
Right. All right. I think I want to ask you one final question, and that is very specifically because this is your subject matter expertise. What do you think of the current legal framework of India for the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and how can we improve it further? Like, what are the direct actions the Indian regulatory system or the Indian judicial systems can take to make the Indian entrepreneurial system much more conducive?
Well, I mean, let me paraphrase the question, if I may.
Right.
Is so, what can the government do to enable the entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I think the best thing they can do is to get out of the way. The I don't think we necessarily need too much hand-holding beyond a point. What is essential is that you have, and a lot is being done, like in the sense like, your startup registration, for example, to ease certain things for startups, to provide you incentives, financial incentives when you're filing for certain applications, your tax incentives, etc. I think that's more than enough, honestly. Where you really need to the big kind of bottleneck today is when you start looking at various new legislation or regulation around new emerging technologies. And it's essential that if India wants to play the part in a global economy that it clearly has voice kicks aspirations for, you need to have a more an open, a more technology agnostic, balanced view on how one should regulate these technologies. So today, our experience with the cryptocurrency industry, with the drones industry, with aerospace, with e-commerce, with all of this.
I think the fear, don't fear the unknown approach is what you
and also don't have a zero risk threshold to some of these things.
Right.
I mean, obviously, whenever you are experimenting with something new, there is a certain risk you have to learn to live with. The question is there a science to measure that risk? Which is exactly what the Supreme Court said to the RBI as well, right? You've not measured the risk at all.
Right.
So how do you come up with a piece of legislation, and how do you ensure that it is proportionate? What you can't measure, you can't manage, right? So,
Right.
so I think that is what we need. Now the problem with doing that is also that you have weak state capacity, and so even if the government were to try and take upon itself this task, you will probably end up doing a miserable job, and so I think that's where the situation becomes slightly more complicated, and hence the need for getting more technocrats, for doing more public consultations, listening to the industry with less suspicion. Like in the cryptocurrency situation, there were no public consultations done at all for an area that you clearly don't understand, right? And that we so do more public consultations, engage with the industry. Just have an open mind. I think and I think one of your regulatory objectives should be to enhance innovation. I think the government of the day should be measured, or our regulators should be measured, or their regulatory intervention should be measured, amongst other things. I mean, not only on the basis of how much risk they've been able to manage, but also how much innovation they have been able to push through.
Right.
And unless we do that, I think we will keep seeing reruns of the cryptocurrency or the drone fiasco.
I think,
in the
because
country.
you've had a major deja vu because of the cryptocurrency and then followed by the drone regulations, right? Two emerging technologies, both facing the same problems at the hand of the regulators.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Anirudh, for joining us today. We wish you and Ikigai the best of luck for the future, and we hope that you continue fighting the good fight. right? And to make the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem much more conducive. And we really hope that you come onto this platform once again, because you're a true subject matter expert on a lot of things, and I think we barely scratched the surface with this conversation. So thank you once again.
No, thank you so much for having me here, and good luck to you as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode. The Indianaut Podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook to receive all updates on the upcoming episodes. We'll see you in the next one.